here on Friday at 11:30. I hope you all can come. It should be wonderful. And we're having a fish fry afterwards. Come to the fish fry.
Pass the word.
Yeah. I'm so proud to introduce my little brother. Growing up, we were just 2.5 years apart, and we fought like cats and dogs. In fact, I don't think it was until college that we quit fighting. I went to Baylor, and he came to Baylor and was the quarterback for the football team. And our other little brother, who died a few years ago, went to TCU. So we had a very enthusiastic athletic background. Chuck, when he graduated, he went to work for Honeywell, right, in San Antonio, and played for the semi-pro team in San Antonio. And he walked on several times to try to get on the Cowboys, but after a couple of years, I think you said, he was tired of playing football. But when we would go to the games, people would be in the stands and they would go, "Chucky, Olay! Chucky, Olay!" And so we've done that to him all of his life. I think it wasn't until my dad died in 2000 that you began really collecting. And he started with my dad's memorabilia. He was in the Army Air Corps. And his passion for collecting just grew and grew and grew way past World War II and into just all of American history. We have a long history ourselves in Texas, and I'm sure Chuck will tell you the story. But I'm just so glad that he agreed to come here tonight and to speak because, he's just a normal person like us, but he has a museum-worthy collection in his home, uninsurable. It's just, his things are priceless. So he brought a few.
Here's your address.
So anyway, feel free to look around, and after Chuck speaks, feel free to ask him anything you would like. With that, I'll introduce Chuck Gossett.
Thank you, Sissy. I don't remember us fighting all that much, but it's because I always won the fights. That was right. But thank y'all very much for having me here tonight. I always love talking about my collection. I did start collecting probably about 20, 25 years ago. After my dad died, I just got interested in all of the military and the things that my dad did when he was in the Army Air Corps. He, right out of college, right out of high school, he joined the Army Air Corps, spent 4 years over in North Africa flying C-47s, flew over 300 missions over what's called the hump, over the Himalayan hump. So he flew some very dangerous missions, but he really never told me much about the war. He just didn't seem to talk about it until the last few years before he died, and he got me started in it. He used to take me to the old Hobby Airport down in Houston, and we'd sit there, and he would name the planes that were taking off. And so I got very interested in the Air Force and the military and thought that maybe one of these days I was going to be a pilot. But when I found out I was half blind and deaf in one ear, there was going to be no piloting for me, so I moved into other things. But like my sister said, I'm just a plain old guy who just appreciates these things and likes to collect. I'm an air conditioning man. When I got out of college, I tried my best to play football, but I finally wised up and said, "You are too small, too slow, and you're white. You're never going to play football." So I finally got out of that, and my dad and I started an air conditioning business, and that's what I've been doing for the past 48 years. But it's blessed me, and it's allowed me to have this great this collection that I have. But in collecting, sometimes folks always ask me, what is the art of collecting? And for me, collecting's not an art, it's a passion. It's a great passion. But when you are collecting, you do have to know a few things about collecting what you're collecting. Mainly, you want to know the value of it, what you're going to pay for it. And when you're collecting, there's really just a lot of rational, logical thought that goes into what you're collecting. But the number one item on collection is the value of an object is in the eyes of the beholder. I have guns from World War I, from the war between the states, that other people would look at, that are old and rusty, and other people would look at and say, I don't want that, you can't even shoot that. Well, most of them you can shoot, but it'd be very hard to do. But there are other people that look at some of my guns and they're amazed by them because they are very old guns and very unique guns. But that is the main thing that I collect are armaments, are the guns. I have about 350 guns from the era of 1776, 1836, the war between the states, 1860 to 65, and World War I and World War II. And that's probably my main passion, is collecting these guns. But I've also gotten into collecting signatures of great men that I greatly admire, of men that I think very highly of. And I, for some reason, think that collecting their signatures on documents is something that is valuable and that I want to preserve and keep forever. But the next thing that you would want to know about collecting, after the eye of the beholder, you pick your area that you want to collect. Then you want to know, of course, if it's a signature, you want to know who that person is. Is he famous? Is he not famous? That's the value right there. Then the next thing on my book as to determining value would be, is it third-party identified? You never, ever accept the word of the person you're buying it from. Always get a third-party verification on it, if it's a signature, or even a gun, or anything that's valuable. Then you would want to look at the date and when it was written. Just take something like George Washington. Say George Washington's signature. They can range anywhere from about $6,000 to about $90,000. So what makes them so different? If you find a document with George Washington's name on it that was written in 1776, woo, you've got a pocket full of money right there. But if it was written in 1790 or even earlier in 1760, it's not as valuable. So that's another item that will determine the value. And then also the condition that it's in. Is it a bold signature? Is the gun clean? Does the gun have all matching identification marks on it? And all matching serial numbers? And the condition, is it ragged? Is it torn up? Or is it a nice clean document? And lastly, on signatures, there are two different types. There's what you call a cut signature, and then there's a signature on a document. And a cut signature simply means that sometime in the past, somebody found in their collection a letter that was signed by, let's just pick a name, George Washington. And they said, wow, he was a famous guy. I want to keep that signature. And they cut his signature off that letter, and they kept that. That's called a cut signature, and it just reduced the value by thousands and thousands of dollars. If they had kept it on that document, you've got a moneymaker for you right there. But that's just the basis of collecting. And so the things that I have, one thing I always get done to my signatures and guns is take it to a third party and say, is this real? And I have been burned. I have taken it to a third party and they said, sorry, Chuck, this is bogus. This isn't a real gun. This isn't the correct signature. And so luckily I haven't lost too much money. I've taken it back to the person that sold it to me, and I was very lucky in getting reimbursed for it. But I collect basically 4 different eras. The era of 1776, the era of 1836, the era of 1860 to 65, and then World War I and World War II. Those are my favorite areas to learn about and to collect on. And one of my most favorite men that I love in 1776 is the great General George Washington. And this is his signature right here. That is on a document, that's on a legal document. You can look at it later and you can see that's signed by George Washington. And he is one of my most favorite generals. He was a great Christian warrior. He was a great man of honor, integrity, and he had great charisma. Men followed him everywhere. They were willing to fight for him everywhere. They crossed the Delaware on Christmas Eve in freezing weather because they believed in George Washington and the cause he was fighting for. But I do have a wonderful story that I'd like to tell about George Washington. But believe it or not, he won many battles and he lost several battles. He did make some bad decisions at times. But the story I want to tell you tonight, surprisingly, is a story about a battle that he lost. Why would I tell you a story about a battle George Washington lost? Why not his victories? Well, you'll see. The story is the Battle of Long Island. And if I could, I'm going to borrow this piece of chalk right here, and I'm going to kind of paint you a picture of what this battle took, how this battle took place in 1776. Now, I'm definitely no artist, so you'll have to bear with me on that. But if you can picture this being Manhattan Island. This side of Manhattan Island is the East River. Up this side of Manhattan Island is the Hudson River. And basically, Long Island comes right around here like this. Over here is Staten Island. That's Long Island, which at the time was called Brookline. Now we basically call it Brooklyn. But this is Long Island over here. Up here is an area called the Narrows, and this is basically New York Harbor, or the Upper Bay and the Lower Bay. Down here's Lower Bay, up here Upper Bay. Now, in 1776, and the year or two before that, the British were already moving into the United States. They knew there was going to be trouble, and so the British started coming into the United States. On July the 2nd of 1776, 56 men got together and said, we need to declare our independence from Great Britain. On July 4th, they signed the document. On July 6th, that document got out to all the generals that had already formed an army, and there had already been many skirmishes. Just before that, the spring of 1776, George Washington beat General Lord Howe at the Battle of Bunker Hill, also called Breed's Hill, in the Battle of Boston. General Howe didn't like that at all. He was very embarrassed by that, and he did not like the fact that Washington had beat him. But the British were amassing troops on Long Island and in this area right here. And by late August of 1776, there were almost, believe this, 400 British warships lined this area right here, coming through the Narrows up to New York Harbor. Now, everyone knew that whoever held New York Island, Manhattan, held a very great strong point in the colonies, the 13 colonies. So 400 warships were coming up the Narrows, up into Boston Harbor. Over here on Long Island, over 40,000 British and Hessian soldiers were filling Long Island. They were all getting ready to take New York, and there were many British soldiers on Staten Island. Now, the colonists, the Americans, had built 4 forts right here and one right there. This is Fort George. This is Fort Defiance. This is Fort Box. This is Fort Greene. And right here is Fort Sterling. And this is where the action took place. When George Washington got his 15,000 troops over here onto Long Island, he then realized the predicament he was in. He said, how in the world am I going to beat 40,000 British over here and 400 warship with 32,000 men on it coming up the Narrows? How am I going to win this battle? So he had what options? He said, well, we can fight and probably die, or we can surrender. If he surrenders, he loses his 7,000 to 8,000 men who were still able to fight, and himself would be either killed or taken prisoner. So what is Washington going to do? Washington said, nope, we're not giving up. We're going to escape. All his men now, several had been killed over here in Long Island. All his men, and these 3 forts were all deserted. They were torn down and bombed. This one last fort was still standing, Fort Sterling. All his men, somewhere around 8,000 men, moved into Fort Sterling. And they said, we've got to get across the East River so we can get onto Manhattan Island, march a fast march up Manhattan Island, cross over the Hudson River, and move into New York State. And then we can recoup, reorganize, and fight another day. But how is he going to get across here without these 40,000 British shutting him down, or 400 British warships continued to keep coming up the Narrows into New York Harbor? Well, on August the 28th, a very lucky thing happened. A nor'easter blew into New York. Now, we all know that the nor'easter means it's coming out of the northeast, blowing southwest. These boats moved by sail. The nor'easter kept these 400 British warships from moving up here closer to where they could see him crossing the East River, because they were far enough down the line that they couldn't do anything. They were just too far away. So George Washington said, with this nor'easter here, we've got to move now. He said, tonight at 9 o'clock, we're moving out. And so he sent word over to New York Island, send boats over here, as many as you can, pick up our soldiers, we're going to cross over tonight. Well, at 9 o'clock, the nor'easter is still blowing, and they start these boats. Now, they sent over small barges, which is basically what Washington crossed the Delaware on a small barge. And so these small barges started coming across the East River, picking up the men and turning around and going back. But the problem was, the nor'easter that kept these 400 British ships at bay was hindering their ability to row across the East River. They were having a very difficult time getting across the East River. And then another lucky thing happened. At around 11 o'clock that night, the nor'easter dies out. Now the boats can come across to Fort Sterling, pick up men, and go back and forth, back and forth. It's nighttime now. The British ships can't see what's going on right here. And they're not going to do anything at night. In that era, very few battles were fought at night. They just didn't do that. So they couldn't see what was going on at nighttime. And General Washington had a very brave general under named John Mifflin. John Mifflin said, General, I will stay here in Fort Sterling, and me and my men will keep our fires burning all night long while you're escaping over here across the East River. We will keep our fires burning so that the 40,000 British will think we're still in the fort, and they won't attack till tomorrow morning. So Mifflin sacrificed him and his men to stay there. So they are starting to cross over now all night long. They're getting men over. They actually took their horses. They took their cannon. They wrapped the wheels of the cannon in rags, the feet of the horses in rags, so it would be quiet, so no noise was made as they were crossing over the East River. All the men are just about to get over there. There's probably 1,000 left, maybe a little bit more than that. They've been working all night long. And about 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, what happens at 6 o'clock in the morning? The sun comes up. What are these 1,000 men going to do when the sun comes up and these 400 warships can see them crossing the river? They're doomed. But another very lucky thing happened. At around 5:30 in the morning, one of the densest fogs that has ever hit New York landed right here on New York Harbor. And none of these, they didn't budge because you couldn't see 10 feet in front of you. The little barges had to have a rope tied to the one in front of them because they couldn't even see their way back across the East River. So the fog lasted all the way till lunchtime until everyone got across the East River onto New York Island and started hightailing it up the island. And the last man to leave Fort Sterling was George Washington himself. He said, General Mifflin, let's go. They loaded up a boat, went across the East River, and got onto New York Island. Wow. How lucky is George Washington? let me tell you something, what I believe. There was no luck whatsoever. That was the hand of God that said, I know without a doubt this man is going to make this great nation. This man is going to lead him and several of his great generals in winning this upcoming war. And therefore, the hand of God said, I'm going to send that northeaster. The hand of God said, I'm going to stop that northeaster. And the hand of God said, I'm going to send this fog right now. I believe with all my heart that if the Bible were kept being written all the way up to 1776, you would have a chapter in there that said, just like God split the Red Sea for Moses, God sent a northeaster and a fog for George Washington. Because he knew without a doubt that this nation was going to be great and was going to be a great Christian nation that was going to lead the world and be a great nation for the next 200 years. So he put his hand on George Washington and made it possible for him to lead the great men and his great generals in 1776 to win our independence. Now, we like to call the War of 1776 the American Revolution. But it really was not a revolution. The 13 colonies had no intent whatsoever of going over to King George and saying, we're going to kick you out of office, we're going to take over your kingship. All they wanted to do was separate themselves from Great Britain and King George III. It actually was a secession. It was not a revolution at all. But after 1776, and these great men like Israel Putnam, General Israel Putnam, General Mad Anthony Wayne, Light Horse Harry Lee, the father of General Robert E. Lee, Charles Stuart Lee. These are great generals that, and almost every man that I named tonight, I have his signature. And I'm very proud of that. I'm very proud of these guys. But all these men led into the victory of 1776 and allowed the 13 colonies to then start to prosper and to grow and have freedom. We know we then had to struggle with the War of 1812, but we got through that and we finally said, British, y'all stay out of here. It's over with now. We are the United States. So now the United States is able to move westward. And so as they move westward, we find more great men came into our country, namely in this great state of Texas. We all know the story of back in the early 1800s, the great Stephen F. Austin is called the father of Texas. But in reality, he did bring about he brought what's called the Old 300 into Texas. And he did bring a lot of families into Texas to settle the northern province of Texas, Coahuila de Tejas. That's what it was at the time. And Stephen F. Austin was the one who saw to it that Mexico signed the Constitution of 1824, which guaranteed the northern province of Mexico its freedoms and law and order and education. And although there wasn't an article in there that said you have to be Catholic, they didn't really observe that, but gave them their freedom. But before Stephen F. Austin, who is the father of Texas, there was another man who actually brought dozens and dozens of families to the northern province of Mexico. And he was the one who first contacted the Mexican government and said, this is what I want to do. And the Mexican government said, come on in. We want you here. For one really main reason, you're going to settle that area, you're going to grow that area, you're going to prosper that area, but you're going to be a buffer between us and the Indians. So they wanted the colonists to come into the northern section of Mexico. But this man who first started it was this man right here. His name, was Moses Austin, the father of Stephen F. Austin. Not many people know who he is, but he was the first colonist to bring families into Texas. And then on his deathbed, Moses caught pneumonia, and on his deathbed, he had gone home. And while there, he said to his son, son, will you please continue my mission of colonizing the great state of Tejas? So Stephen took up the banner, and as we all know, we call him the father of Texas. Now, in 1836, great thing happened again. Great men decided we don't want to be under the tyranny of a man named Santa Anna. Santa Anna basically said, Constitution of 1824, sorry, we're not following that. We are going to move in, and I want that area back. I want nothing but Mexican colonists. I want these American colonists out of the way. One reason is because the land became so prosperous. The Americans moved in there, and they grew, and they built, and it was wonderful things. And Santa Anna said, I want all that. So he wanted to run the colonists out of the northern province of Mexico. So we know that in 1836, he moved somewhere around 6,000 troops across the Rio Grande and said, we're moving into San Antonio. And we are going to first take San Antonio and then move into every area of Texas and run the colonists out. Now, Santa Anna was not a nice man. He was an evil dictator, and he massacred many of his own people in Mexico. There's a town, I believe the name is Zacatecas, that had about 7,000 people. And they said, Santa Anna, we're not going to obey you. We want our democratic society, which Mexico had before Santa Anna came in. And they said, we're not going to obey you. Santa Anna took his troops to Zacatecas and massacred 7,000 men and women there in Zacatecas and a few other towns also. So he set up what he was going to do and how he was going to take Texas back. Santa Anna called himself the Napoleon of the West. He was one arrogant son of a gun, and he thought he was something very, very special. So he took his 6,000 troops, moved into Texas across the Rio Grande, moving up towards San Antonio. The troops did split off. There's controversy as to how many Mexican troops were at the Battle of the Alamo. We know there had to be at least 2,000 to 4,000 troops at the Battle of the Alamo. We know that in the Alamo were at least 160 to 200 men. There just depends on who you want to read as to the number of men in the Alamo that died in the Alamo. Now, there were about 5 men that did make it, that did live through the battle, or 5 people who lived through the Battle of the Alamo. And we get most of our stories from them, but we get a tremendous amount of information from the Mexican soldiers. If you read the book about the Alamo, about Texas, about anything like that, they will reference Mexican soldiers and what they wrote after the 1836. And so in 1836, the siege of the Alamo begins, and we had great fighting Texans in the Battle of the Alamo. We had great men. One of them, the great Jim Bowie, right here. There were 3 leaders in the Alamo: Jim Bowie, David Crockett, and William Barrett Travis. Jim Bowie's signature is right here, is one of the most rare signatures you can find. And he was a great frontiersman. He was from Kentucky, then went into Louisiana. Then he said, I'm going to go fight in Texas. And he got well known for what's called the Sandbar fight, in which he and his brother Rezin defeated about 5 men. Bowie was shot twice and stabbed 3 times and still able to get up and defend himself and to kill those who were trying to kill him. So that began his reputation. But he also cut his thumb severely. It was already cut very badly. And so he couldn't hold a knife very well. So his brother Rezin said, I'm going to take care of that. And his brother Rezin went to the blacksmith and said, I'm going to make a knife, which has become called the Bowie knife, which has it's just a knife with a very large handle, but it has like a scabbard on it. And the reason was so that his brother Jim could hold the knife without having his thumb being real strong. So the Bowie knife became famous. Everybody wanted a Bowie knife after that. But we know Jim Bowie led his men into the Alamo, and they set up. They were ready to fight. Jim Bowie then got sick, and he was bedridden. He had some type of pneumonia or tuberculosis. No one really knows. But Jim Bowie was very charismatic, and his men would follow him anywhere. Another great leader in the Alamo was William Barrett Travis. This is his signature and picture right here. William Barrett Travis was from Tennessee. He was a lawyer and a military man. And he came to Texas and said, I want to fight in Texas. I want to help these people win their independence and their freedom from Mexico. So he was given the orders to take 200 men to the Alamo to fight. He was able to round up about 40 or 50, and they went into the Alamo, and they moved in and got ready to fight. William Barrett Travis was one of the first men killed when the Mexicans attacked. He was up on one of the parapets shooting, and he was shot in the face, and he died immediately. A third man in the Battle of the Alamo is the great David Crockett, Colonel David Crockett. This is his signature right here on a document. Now, Davy Crockett came from Tennessee. We all know that. And we probably, if you're like me, we watched the old TV series, Davy Crockett, along with Wyatt Earp and the Rifleman and all those, and I loved Davy Crockett. But he was a great man, very charismatic, and he, as a young boy, he was pretty hard to tame. He ran away from home several times, came back home. He basically educated himself, but he became a politician. He also became a very famous man. They had Broadway plays about Davy Crockett before Davy even died, while he was still alive. He didn't really like that very much, and he did not like being called Davy. He would say, my name is David. And he was called Colonel David Crockett. But he then, on his second term for Congress, he lost out of Tennessee. And that's when he made the famous statement after he lost. He said, you may all go to H-E-double-L, I'm going to Texas. And Davy took off down the old San Antonio trail out of Tennessee coming towards Texas. And while he was coming in, right on the edge of Texas, of the northern province of Mexico, he came to a little small village. And this village had several, it was a fairly decent-sized village. And there were several men in the village that came out and said, wait a minute, who are these guys coming? This was Davy Crockett, and he had several men with him. He said, they could be horse thieves. They could be cattle rustlers. What are they going to do coming here? So the men of the town walked out with their guns, and they stood there, and the head man said, who are you? Who goes there? What do you want in our town? And all of a sudden, a voice came back from Davy Crockett, and he said, Elijah, is that you? And it was Elijah, his old buddy, boyhood friend from Tennessee. So they got together, and they spent the night together before Davy headed off to San Antonio. Now, that is one of my very favorite stories for this reason. Elijah, last name, was Gossett. He's my 4 times great-grandfather, Elijah Gossett. And his son, Andrew Edward Gossett, he's 5 times great-grandfather. His son, Andrew Edward Gossett, is 4 times great-grandfather. And so I'm very proud of that connection. So that is why I loved that show so much when I was a kid, I think. But I never really knew that story till about probably 6 or 7, 8 years ago. But then we know the great story of how Davy went into the Alamo, led his men into the Alamo, and they fought the great Battle of the Alamo when Santa Anna attacked. Now, we know also another great story of the Alamo that shows the great courage of these men. This man right here, William Barrett Travis, the night before the siege, the Mexican troops had raised the red flag. The red flag said, we're taking no quarter. If we capture you, you're dead. So you better either win or you're going to die. And they played their bugle all night long with a song that I think was called the Diablo or something like that, but it meant the same thing. When we catch you, you're dead. We're taking no prisoners. No quarter will be given. We all know the battle, but that night, the great William Barrett Travis took his saber out. And he had his 150, 160 men, and he drew a line in the sand. And he said, men, you can leave tonight. But if you want to stay and fight the battle, cross over this line. All but one man of the 160, 170 men crossed over that line to say, we're going to stay and fight. Even the great Jim Bowie, who was bedridden, said, men, pick up my bed, carry me across that line. so that I can be a part of this battle. And Jim Bowie died in his room in his cot with 2 flintlock pistols and his Bowie knife in his hand and 3 or 4 dead Mexicans in that room. All these men died. There was only one man that did not cross the line. His name was Francis Rose. And they allowed him to escape that night, and he went off into the sunset, and he went different places, but they found him later on, and he confirmed the story about the Battle of the Line, the crossing the line. So don't ever let these new historians we have come around try to disparage our great Alamo and the Battle of the Alamo and the things that happened, because they are well documented by people who survived, which would be the wife of Almiron Dickinson, Susanna Dickinson, and her daughter, Angelina Dickinson. And there was a slave of William Barrett Travis, Jim, who survived. They told these stories, and people wrote it down, and it was passed on and passed on. So our history of the Alamo here in Texas is a great and noble history. And we had great, great, great fighters here in Texas. Great men who fought and won our independence. Now, Texas actually then had to fight another battle against Mexico. It was in 1848, and it's called the Mexican-American War. And this time, we are now not a republic any longer. We are now a state of Texas. So American soldiers came to fight in the War of 1848, the Mexican-American War. And one very great man that is one of my high on my list, way up there with these other ones, is a great Christian soldier named Robert E. Lee. And Robert E. Lee came to fight in the Mexican-American War. So back in 1846, Robert E. Lee came to fight here. General Lee, while he was here, grew extremely fond of Texas and Texans. He loved its landscape, its people, the rivers, the forests, the towns, everything about it, but especially its soldiers. Texans had a reputation for being fierce and hard-fighting men, and Robert E. Lee saw that, and he appreciated that greatly. And later on, in 1862, when the war between the states broke out, one of Robert E. Lee's most treasured brigades was the Texas Brigade, led by the great General John Bell Hood. And the Texas Brigade led in winning many battles in the war between the states. Sharpsburg, Cold Harbor, Little Round Top, and Chickamauga. The Texas Brigade was the right hand of General Robert E. Lee, right along with the Stonewall Brigade. So Robert E. Lee loved Texas and the Texan Brigade. And in 1863, a French commander sent a letter to Robert E. Lee and said, "Can I come visit you so that I can try to understand how such a small army is winning so many battles against such a vast army of the North? They are outmanned and they are outgunned in every way." Now, General Robert E. Lee acquiesced and told this French commander, "Yes, you can come and stand with me and watch my men and see what we do here." And as this French commander stood one day with General Robert E. Lee, watching the Confederate troops march in review, the French commander made a rather derogatory remark about the Texas Brigade to General Lee. Now, the Texas Brigade were fighters first and foremost. They did not give much attention to their uniforms. They weren't known for having bright, shiny, beautiful, put together uniforms. They were kind of a ragtag group. But as they marched by, this French commander said to General Lee, "Look at the uniforms of those Texas Brigade. Why, they are so torn and tattered, you can see their backside when they march by." And General Lee then turned and looked at this man very sternly, and he said, "Sir, that means nothing to me, because the enemy will never see the backside of my Texas Brigade." These are our Texas men and fighters right here in Texas. We have a lot to be proud of. We can go all the way back to 1776 again and see the great men under George Washington, John Hancock, John Adams, Lyman Hall, Light Horse Harry Lee, Mad Anthony Wayne. All these men were great men that won our freedom in 1776. The great General Nathaniel Greene, the great French commander Lafayette came and helped George Washington, became great friends with George Washington. Over 25,000 men, Americans, died in 1776 to win our independence from Great Britain. Again, in 1812, almost 20,000 American men died fighting the second battle with Great Britain. During this time, the great Francis Scott Key in the Boston Harbor saw the beautiful flag, Stars and Stripes, flying, and he wrote the great Star-Spangled Banner with 15 stars and 15 stripes. In 1836, the great northern province of Mexico came to be called the great state of Texas, fought for its freedom and independence from the tyrant Santa Anna. The great men like Sam Houston, Marabou B. Lamar, Sidney Johnson, Juan Seguin, Green B. Jameson, J.C. Neal, Deaf Smith, all of these men who fought. The great James Fannin and his 300 men who were massacred at the Battle of Goliad right after the Alamo. These men fought and died for what they believed in, great freedom, which led to our great freedom we have today. In 1861 through 1865, over 600,000 men died fighting for what they believed in. Whether you think it's slavery, whether you think it's taxes, whatever you think, 600 men said, I've got a principle and I'm going to fight for that great principle. And they were willing to die for it. The great men like Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson, James Longstreet, John Bell Hood, Jeb Stuart, all these men were willing to fight and pay the price to win freedom, to win the principles that they believed in. In 1917, in World War I, 116,000 men and women died fighting the tyranny of the Axis powers. Led by Germany and Kaiser Wilhelm II, the United States and great Americans under men like Black Jack Pershing beat the Germans back. And it was Kaiser Wilhelm II who made the remark, he who controls the media controls the minds of the people. Boy, don't we see that today. In 1941, in World War II, over 407,000 men and women died fighting for freedom against Germany and the great dictator Adolf Hitler. The great Ike Eisenhower, Douglas MacArthur, George Patton, and many more led in winning our freedom so that the Germans could not come in and we would all be speaking German today if we had not won that war. The Korean War, the Vietnam War, Persian Gulf War, Afghanistan, and Iraq. Many more thousand wonderful Americans died fighting for freedom, fighting for what they believed in. So this is what I collect. This is why I collect. I think these men should be admired and they should be remembered forever. Now, were these men perfect? No. Every one of these men we could point out flaws. Pick a book about one of them, read it, and you'll see some of his flaws. But they were great men. There's only one man who had no flaw, and that's our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. He's the only one that we can look to and say, he was absolute perfection. So these are the men that made this great nation. And I believe God's going to use this nation, and hopefully He's going to continue to use this nation. But there's a saying that I love dearly that I kind of base a lot of my collection on that I'll leave with you tonight in ending. The saying, it's an unknown author. I've never found out who actually said it. But it's a saying that goes like this. Pity the nation that has no heroes, but shame on the nation that doesn't remember its heroes. Thank y'all for letting me be here tonight. I appreciate it.